A place without the Kemetic man, a world without fathers affects the outcome of our children's growth. You see, we're needed not in prisons, but instead in our homes, in our schools, in our communities. It is up to us. We must positively teach them and teach the children not to be foolish. Equip them. See, our women can't do it all. Slavery, drugs, pistols in the hood was Europe's final call. Another one bites the dust. Laid out, stretched out in a line of white chalk. See, that was the plot from the beginning. They never taught that we invented mathematics, science, and furthermore, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the Greeks, were not the first psychologists. It's a farce created by a group of lionologists. But we are gifted. Yet we were stolen and sold from Sudan to Egypt, worked from sun up to sundown, from can't see in the morning to can't see at night, broken backs just to see the tribe fall. Prisons equals plantations. Informed ones know that slavery has shifted now, ain't that right? No longer, brothers, can we afford to be MPNIA. In simple terms, it means missing plus not in action. Look how our young children are acting. Instead of reading a book, they're hooked on flavor of love, bullshit shows, Game Boy, PlayStation videos. Education is lacking. Too many of our sons are packing and calling themselves pimps, dogs, niggas, and bitches. 12 and 13-year-old boys are screaming about how they are macking. Backwards, you know, niggas spell sagging. It's like the mental pilot is on automatic destruction, is what some say. But we cannot start tomorrow or later, greater. We must be right now, right here, today. See, a world without fathers, black fathers particularly, is a travesty. Have we become so desensitized, closed mouths and eyes that we cannot recognize or we refuse to realize the catastrophe of our condition globally? Look around sometimes. We need another 1,000 Malcolms to speak, another Mumia, Assata, Eddie Mabo, or Khalid Muhammad speech. As a matter of fact, multiply that x to the fifth, no, lift that power to the 10th, and then divide it into 360 degrees. Our children need academics. Our male face they deserve to see in all sectors. It's gotta be. Teach them about Tulsa, Oklahoma. Not too long ago, it was called Black Wall Street. Reach out and understand. Misrepresented, yes, man, we gotta change this stuff ourselves. Where are you, black man? Stand up, African seeds and strands, descendants of the Kemetic land, and stop the violence. Mental genocide on the street. Another night, another fatherless child cries self to sleep. See, it's time to peep game because our ancestors, they've got to be turning over in their graves after all that they went through. See, it's crazy. Where are you? See, fathers are the first man in a daughter's life. And part of your role as Baba depends on the type of wife that they'll make for our sons. Don't you think that our situation would have turned out different if little Africa, back in 1921, I repeat it again, in the state of Tulsa, Oklahoma, was never leveled, burned down to the ground, and sounds of government air bomb blast, mothers screaming for their husbands, and children fleeing with their dads? See, the past has a lot to do with the now and the future. Don't believe the hype. Not every African dad is a loser. See, I can never buy into that. Greenwood, Ave, and Pine is where it all took place. Band Together is where the Gap got his name. Listen to their song and message and dance. And even though Barack Obama is the president, we're still living in a society which is straight out racist, calculating just how many prisons to build and filled with us, done out of jealousy. What about our story? You see, history, or his side of the story, has seriously missing pages. They have stolen our legacy, misplaced it, replaced it, and our sons and daughters are being miseducated, purposely enslaving minds. I said, come back, John Carlos and Tommy Smith, with the Black Power sign. You see, I ignite souls of those who have no idea of what it means to have goals. So where are you, fathers, brothers, dad and pops? I say this black on black crime has really, truly got to stop.
Thank you very much. That's Kinara Sankofa, and what a powerful piece of information that was. You know, I think about how you capture the enunciation of the words and the timing and the rhythm. How much time does it take to, I mean, you have to think about what you want to say, but being able to enunciate it with such power, I mean, you break through that fourth wall through that television set, through that stage. I've seen you perform before.
Yes.
That's a power that's down deep. So I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Michael.
And maybe give us a little insight into, you're a poet and a spoken word artist, and that's an instrument, just like the rest of the instrumentations and the melodies. You knocked it out of the ballpark.
Thank you.
Talk to me about this particular poem.
Well, Where Are You Fathers came about in, say, 2010 off of my latest CD, The Coldest Summer Ever. And what I recognized working in the schools in Oakland and then also in Richmond is that there are a lot of missing black men in the schools teaching, and there were a lot of fathers missing from coming up to those schools that I was instrumental in teaching one of my classes there. And I recognized that as a father, that there's something truly lacking in our community, and the destruction of what's going on within our community is because of a lack of fathers there.
How do you multiply that? I mean, you know, you're only one person, and you're staying close by here in the Bay Area, but the Bay Area is a replication of 10,000 other cities with the same issues, missing fathers, strangers to their families. The matriarch has been, you know, towing the road, but the father is a very critical part of this paradigm that becomes the family, the unit.
Well, it's very important, as you've said, for fathers to not just only be in the homes, but in all areas.
Okay, as teachers?
As teachers.
Yes.
And I want to say Dr. Frances Quest Welsing,
Yes.
Whom I've loved watching her on YouTube and reading a lot of her material. When you have a system here in the United States that practice racism, and this is a very, very big problem here, which removed a lot of fathers out of the home.
But people will say quickly that we're in a post-racist society now, that it's gone. Get over it. That's what I'm hearing out here on the street, and it seems like it's not in balance with what the reality is every day. We experience racism, and certainly we know about Wall Street, or at least I knew about Wall Street in the 1920s, but that's almost 100 years ago, and it's still here present today. And I think the question that I want to ask is this jealousy on the part of the government or part of these vigilante groups? I mean, are they, you know, why can't we enjoy the success of humanity?
That's a very good question. I'm glad that you asked that question. Unfortunately, we have been fed a lie. And that lie, for one example, is that we are a minority.
Okay.
And we've bought into that trickology. Black people, whom are the mothers and fathers of civilization, and everyone comes from her. Chinese, Lebanese, and any other kind of names for that matter, come from her. And when we are fed this lie about whom we are, then you can build upon that. And so therefore, when
it becomes reality.
It becomes, exactly,
wow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately, we systematically, automatically call ourselves a minority, which we are 9/10 of the world's population. So therefore, and Europeans or whites are 1/10 of that population. So what has happened in that, as Dr. Frances Quest Welsing would state, that racism is a global system of organized behavior of thought, speech, and action for white supremacy domination in all areas of people activity. And those areas are education, economics, labor law, religion, sex, war, and politics. So when you have racism in that apparatus, and we're not understanding what's going on and how it exists and why it exists. And I think we need to talk about, why does it exist?
So there's a bigger picture
It's
out
a much
here,
bigger picture.
And if we were to look at it as a chess game, we are being manipulated into believing that we are a minority, and you're saying that we're not.
Of course we're not.
I'm looking at the chains of this mental unchained, but that's a metaphor also, that those physical shackles
Yes.
have been now put on the brain, is what you're saying.
Exactly. And until we remove those mental shackles, then we will stay enslaved mentally.
Is it easy enough, though, say for a father who can come back to his home, because apparently a lot of them are missing in action. They're not present in their lives. It's a mama's baby, papa's maybe. It's my baby's daddy, the daddy's baby, whatever is going on. These short little cliches are not good enough for the missing black men that are not anywhere near their family. Welfare doesn't allow it to happen. I mean, the whole system seems to be against that. How easy or how difficult would it be to bring a father back into the lives of their family?
Well, I believe it's really important that we, the black man and black woman, sit down and have a talk. We first have to understand what is racism, what it looks like, why it exists. And once we are able to understand, in my opinion, why it exists, then we can then start to look towards one another and stop blaming one another. Oftentimes, black man is blaming the black woman. Yep. Black woman is blaming the black man, and we're clubbing each other over the head.
Yeah, we're not pointing it at the real oppressive system that is implementing this plan.
Exactly.
But the language that we have to use is English, which is not our native tongue. I mean, we've been here for 7 generations, 8 generations, depending on how you want it. But the language, maybe there are feelings that cannot be translated into English, that the families feel frustrated trying to have this conversation. What would you say about that? How can we communicate, given that we have another language that we must speak, which is English?
Well, this is the only language that we have that we understand, so we have to start there with that language that we can understand. I believe for myself that it's really important that, once again, that we understand why racism exists.
And so why would you say?
And I say the reason why it exists is because when Europeans circumnavigated the globe and came to the realization that on the planet, 9/10 of the world's population were black and people of color. That's when the attack came about, is because Houston, we have a problem. I recall seeing an article in Time magazine, 1992.
Oh, I think I know the one.
I think it was April. Well, actually, no, it wasn't that one, but it said, "What will America or the U.S. look like when whites are no longer the majority?"
Oh, yes, okay.
And on the front of that, it also had the American flag, which had a red stripe, a yellow stripe, a brown stripe, a yellow stripe, a brown stripe, and a red stripe. So the red, white, and blue was no longer there, no stars and stripes. So behind the scene, though, what will it look like when whites are no longer the majority? I believe there was a subliminal message, like what is going to happen next? Houston, we do have a problem, and that attack, and I tie that into during slavery. The African male's genitals were removed. He was castrated from a fear of a black planet. And what has happened from there, we look at chemical warfare, biological warfare, we look at age, we look at the removal of black men during the 60s to get support from the government, welfare, so therefore the black man could not be in the home. There couldn't be a pair of shoes in order for him to, or his family to receive benefit from the government. So therefore he had to leave the home. So all of this ties into that whole part of the system.
Yeah. So what we have then is probably the last 200 to 300 years, at least this country's, in terms of the control, the white privilege, will that run its course in the next 10, 25, 30 years, or do we have to do something now?
We have to do something now. Because if you look at what's going on, 1 in every 2 black males between the ages of 18 and 25, according to the National Urban League, are incarcerated or in the judicial system. Yeah. We have a high black-on-black crime rate.
In all the major cities.
Exactly. We have
high population locked up, more in prisons than in universities.
That is correct. When you take those 2 dynamics and then we add single household parenting, we are not in the educational system, the black male, as I say, as far as teachers, I think we make probably about 2% of the teachers nationally. And then we also have to look at homosexuality and not taking anything away, but when we look at all of these individual dynamics,
yeah, it creates a mess.
eventually, if we are not careful and look at what's going on, is genocide, in my opinion. That has always been the ultimate goal of white supremacy. I call it actually white inferiority because you cannot be supreme over your parent, which we are the mothers and fathers of civilization.
Yeah.
So that you cannot be. So once we start to understand the power of which we have and understand who we are as a people and deal with and put our energies to one another as opposed to focusing on some other areas. We need to dedicate that energy and talk about these issues. But one of the problems is that we do not talk about it.
Right. You know, this whole concept of xenophobia, which is the fear of a race of people being eliminated, that's one of the scales of justice. And then the other one is love, which means that if we continue on the next 100 years, next 200 years, as people fall in love, then the white race of people get eliminated if they cross over and love somebody else because they're no longer whatever this white supremacy concept is about. As we move linear down the road of life, you know, the journey of 20 years from now, 40 years from now, the numbers even in this country, I know California about 3 or 4 years ago became 51% people of color, meaning the minorities were in fact now the majority, and that this is spreading across the rest of the nation. We have 320 million people in this country, but we have immigration is one of the spokes in the big wheel. You know, we need the workforce, the country will say, but when these people are coming out of places like Mexico and other parts of the contiguous parts of the United States and across the world, I mean, there's 6 million jobs coming online for technology. A lot of those people may be coming from India or from China. So what will America look like? In relationship to love, which we can never lose sight of, is that we would lose who we are as a people. But the power will have to be sacrificed. That is, I have to give up the power as a power holder, as an owner. You know, I look at all these big buildings, downtown Oakland, San Francisco. You know, I say, you know, why can't we own something like that?
Well, we have to first believe that we can. I mean, we've owned a lot before this, as I mentioned earlier. Even in my poem, I talk about Black Wall Street.
Yeah, but there's no Black Wall Street today.
We can have a Black Wall Street if we start to look towards one another. And until that happens, we will continue to be in this situation. We have the power.
But let's just take this concept of Willie Lynch concept. Find something different, division, hair color or grade, skin color, ageism. I mean, everything factors into this Willie Lynch letter. Whether or not there was a real Willie Lynch, we don't know.
Exactly.
But what the letter said is that you can control a people for thousands of years. This letter was probably written in the late 1600s, let's say. So here we are, we're not anywhere near the first 1,000 years. How do we stop the infighting? The black on black crime is a big one. When we know that there's a bigger bear out there, you know, a system that may not necessarily, I mean, you've got Obama, he's a black president, you know, but he's part of a system.
Exactly.
And it's the system that could be oppressing us, and not so much, say, white folks, but the system of things.
It is I totally agree. It is a system. And how do we break that? When we start to educate ourselves, build our own institution, even inside of the institution. But we must first understand who we are as a people. And we are not understanding who we are as a people. And I'm not just only speaking here within the Americas. I'm talking from a global perspective, because we had kings and queens. I mean, the Nile Valley was the first, which actually had a bartering system. And once we start to understand who we are as a people and the power that we have.
Let me ask you a question then. Is part of the who we are have anything to do with the melanin? Because I remember Frances Cress Welsing spoke about that, and her Neely Fuller was her instructor, and they talk about that creative, because I see it all the time. I see creativity, just pure, unadulterated creativity in the Michael Jackson doing the moonwalk, you know, in the LeBron James. You know, you can just about see any field that we go into, medicine, astrology, astronomy, law, education, that creative source is somewhere, has to do with this melanin that's in the skin. Can you speak to that?
I believe, I want to say it was Umar Johnson was one of the scholars, as well as Phil Valentine, spoke about the connectivity to the sun.
Yes.
That we have a direct connection to that melanin, that sun, that source, which gives us a different rhythm than most people. We walk
We're
differently.
sun people in that sense.
Exactly. We talk differently. We move differently because we are connected to a different power source than other people on the planet, particularly, definitely more so than Europeans who lack that, whom are more calcified. And they spoke about this in one of their documentaries called Hidden Colors. But then Dr. Frances Cress Welsing also speaks about this as well.
I was going to ask you, now this book right here is Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's work. She's a psychiatrist?
Yes.
So she studies the human mind.
Exactly.
And I imagine that there are tenets that she has to stick to, you know, in terms of the believability of what she has to say. But what is the result of this ISIS papers? What was the foundational thing that she writes about? About
the system, the white power structure, why it exists, for the ultimate decision was to remove black people from the planet.
From the entire planet?
Genocide, when you look at AIDS, you look at Ebola, you look at what happened with the Indians, you look at the Tuskegee experiment, all of these ties into her theory of the removal of black people. Why? Because there is a fear of black people.
Okay, and as a psychiatrist, she can get into what this fear source is.
Exactly.
And so what do you think is the source of this fear? Is it just
being kicked from what she would say, being kicked out of the cradle of Africa? And when Europeans were kicked out of the cradle and had to live, apparently, according to her knowledge and to her research, in caves, then they lost that connection, that soulfulness, connectivity to the source of the mother. And that's why she believes, a part of the reason why she believes.
It's almost like a stepchild of a sort.
Exactly.
And so maybe there's a little bit of anger, a little bit of
anger, jealousy.
All the seven deadly sins.
Exactly.
Yeah. You know, it's amazing that here we are on the precipice of technology. It's leaps and bounds. I mean, we've done more in the last 5 years than in the last 50 years, you see, with technology happening. But apparently there was something, the dark ages, I imagine, is probably when it happened. We just lost a lot of knowledge. And so we have lost knowledge of who we are as well.
But was it the dark ages for Europe? Or was it the dark ages for us? Because we've never truly lost our knowledge. We simply have been misinformed and miseducated about the knowledge that's always been there. Because you still have, for example, the pyramids, which still stands, which has a lot of knowledge, history, wisdom that is still there. Unfortunately, we are not using that knowledge that we're connected to simply by our DNA and teaching from within our own institutions. And as long as we, in my opinion, have someone else teaching our story, our history, then we're going to remain misinformed and miseducated.
Yeah. You know, I also wanted to because we only have about 3 or 4 minutes remaining, but you know, I think about the creativity. There's something that's going on at Jeffrey's. It's a nice little club, a little nightclub, and Jeffrey has invited jazz musicians, and he's feeding the community. So we have food for thought, you know, through music and melody, and then we also have food for our stomach. But maybe this is the start of trying to have a gathering. It's like a village, you know, it takes a village to raise a child. As a performer, I imagine you go to places and you give them the knowledge, and this is the kind of information that you bring to them.
That is correct.
That's a good thing.
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, so Jeffrey's is, you know, it's in downtown Oakland, of course. It's $5 for the show and $5 for dinner, and that's a marvelous package. But it's small steps like that that can lead into a giant leap.
Exactly. We have to connect, and that is one form of connecting, bringing arts, food, and then wisdom. Yeah. And we can sit down and communicate. Yeah,
you know, I do it as a cultural artist. I do people who really existed, Malcolm X, of course, and Cedric Douglass.
The play.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's kind of like, that's my little spoke in the big wheel. That's my contribution, my life's calling is that. But the idea would be, what is your life's calling, and what is Johnny's life's calling, what is Mary's life calling, because they have a contribution to make as well.
Yes, that is true. And once we bring all those individual digits together, then we have that power.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for the poetry was just searing. I mean, it just breaks through. I've never heard anything quite like it.
Thank you.
You stand alone as an artist, a cultural artist that is trying to hold up and support and excite and inspire the people, you know, and that it's not against this group and for this group as much as it's for the greater good. And I want to thank you for doing that.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate your time, and thank you for inviting me out.
Good. I see you got another book here. Is that Naeem Akbar?
That's Naeem Akbar, Vision for Black Men. And he said, if you have spent more money on your stereo system than you have books on your shelf, then you are still arrested in your development, and you're still playing boyish games. That's very powerful.
That's the mental diet, the books. The first thing I always look at is people who have books and what they're putting into their bodies, into their brain.
That is correct. Yes.
Wow.
Very important.
You have. So, okay, well, thank you for the program, and I appreciate you coming on and opening up our hearts and our eyes and our ears through your work.
I really enjoyed. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much.